Hello, and welcome to Eureka High School Teachers Speak Out about the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm your host, Dave Frank, and I'm joined here by Rachel FEALK and MAURO, sorry about not mispronouncing your last name, STAIANO? That close? Pretty close? Both of the English department. And also DARCY Brown, who is an art teacher at the middle school and the high school both. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today. So just because we're going to be recording this video, when I'm going to ask a question and throw it out there, and then if you just mention your name so we know who's speaking, that gives the Zoom camera a chance to go on you, and then hopefully we are able to get all of your comments recorded. So I want to start by mentioning, I found a quote for this call today from H.G. Wells that says, human history becomes more and more a race between education and catastrophe. So I have read some articles that say closing our schools turned out to be a catastrophe. And I've also heard evidence that that's not the case. So hopefully from you guys, we'll be able to get a sense of how you were able to adapt your teaching to meet this challenge. So I'm going to start off by saying, if you don't mind, briefly tell us a little bit about how you're doing under the circumstances, under these conditions, and how your teaching has been able to, how you've been able to practice your craft and in the shelter-in-place order that we have, that we're living under. And I guess if you want to go first, Rachel.
Sure. So, as an English teacher, a lot of our curriculum, people think of reading and writing, but really so much of what we do too is students speaking and listening and talking to one another. So it's been a really big shift, kind of losing those social interactions in our classrooms. And we miss our students, they miss us. I think we all miss being there. But I think this has really been an opportunity for us to figure out what is essential in our curriculum, figure out what our students need to do. We've shifted to having all of the kids in similar grades read the same texts or do the same work. And so as a department, we've really collaborated to make sure that all of our students are working on similar projects, similar ideas, and getting a similar workload. So my juniors are reading The Great Gatsby and doing responses to that. And my sophomores are reading Catcher in the Rye and doing lots of writing and responding to that. And then I also teach digital media. And so, my students have done their own Zoom calls that have been recorded, made their own videos, made music playlists, and really interacted with media in a lot of different ways than we might have if we were in school.
So it sounds like some improvisation in the actual teaching style, but you're able, so far, sounds like you've been successfully able to get people to collaborate on the things that your priorities are during this time. It's been working out so far for you?
Yeah, I think teaching looks a lot different. And I think as teachers, I think we've actually collaborated probably more and collaborated better than we even knew we were able to in the past. We always had a really good, at least in my department, we always had a really good rapport and wanted to work together. But I think this is just even, one of the positives is really that it's gotten us all on the same page and had us communicate more. And then when it comes to the students, I think they're really stepping up to the challenge for the most part and kind of taking on independent learning and figuring it out. And, there's some goals and there's some bumps in the road, but I think they're realizing that they're capable of more than they even knew they were.
Fantastic. I'm going to switch over to you now, Darcy. What about you, from your experience in slightly different subject matter, of course? How are you doing during the shelter-in-place order?
Yeah, so it's been an interesting ride. I think that really teaching is an act of massive creativity and, like you said, improvisation. And so we're really used to that as teachers in the classroom, going off of what the students are giving you and improvising. And so now we're having to improvise in this really new way. We're having to really stretch our creativity. For all the arts teachers, it's been pretty difficult to make that transition because we're so used to this style of teaching where we're there with the students, interacting with them, giving them constant feedback. If you go into any of my art classes, I'm just walking around constantly, checking on the students, talking to them. And so it's been really interesting not having that feedback for them, not having the feedback for me. And so that's been one of the real things that I've had to make a change in, is figuring out ways to connect with the students. It's just been a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails. Do you understand what's happening? And each week it gets better and better. I get more students who are like, okay, yeah, we're starting to get this thing. But curriculum-wise, it's a very different curriculum. You can't expect students to have any art supplies at home. Some of them are even struggling to have paper at home or a pencil. And so just getting very, very creative and getting flexible with the type of work that I'm willing to accept. For instance, I do these daily drawings with my middle schoolers where they need to have a pencil and paper. And some of the students who don't, they just started doing Google Drawings.
Oh, cool.
Google Draw. And I was like, excellent, wonderful. You're engaging, you're trying. And so I really appreciate that kind of go get 'em attitude that the teachers need to have, and the students are rising up and meeting us there.
That's excellent. So before we switch over to hear from MAURO, I know you have you have a very short window of time that we can speak with you, Darcy. So if you don't mind, can you kind of give a little bit of follow-up about two elements of your answer? So one is that you said that at first it was difficult to develop the interaction between yourself and your students because of usually you're right over their shoulder, but instead now you've got to be persistent with texts and phone calls and things like that. Can you elaborate a little bit? Because, like, for example, it might be the case we have to do this again in the fall. That's a totally another subject, but the idea is that we should develop some best practices for the peer group, for your peer group, on how we could do that, better as we go on. And you said it's been improving. So can you tell a little bit about the maintaining contact successfully, but also maybe some of the difficulties or the things that maybe didn't work, so that people can learn from your experience?
Yeah, sure. I will try to hit on as much of that as I can. We have been calling, we just decided, I'm on 2 different schools, so there's different situations, but we have a core period, like an advisory class, and we call home to all those students once a week, or we get them in on a Google Meet. And so that covers all the students. So every single student is getting called by at least one teacher, which I think is really important. And now I'm even starting to find time to call students outside of that advisory group. Let's see, what else did you ask? So the beginnings were hard because it was so uncertain. It was all very last second, and we just didn't quite know what to think of this whole pandemic thing. How long is this going to last? We just did not know. So I think that just getting students online has been a big thing and then getting all them Chromebooks has been a big push from administration. And so
that's really big. I'm sorry to jump to you, but I didn't know that happened. So that's what happened. The school district went ahead and took that step for all students.
Yeah, we don't have enough Chromebooks for all students, but we've been just selectively, student by student, depending on who needs it, going in and finding those kiddos, finding who needs the access and getting them what they need. And that's made a huge, huge difference. And just slowly training them on how to do this distance learning thing, being tech support for them if we need to be tech support. I just had a really long tech support meeting with one of my students, training her on how to submit a photograph. So wow. We're finally getting there.
So my question was tips and pitfalls. In your last couple of minutes, do you have any things that you tried and want to, pitfalls? Let people know, maybe that wasn't such an effective teaching technique for remote teaching.
No, so far everything I've done has been perfect. Just kidding. I think that I'm trying to make my work as engaging as possible. And I do that by being really silly. I often will make videos and I'll dress up in crazy costumes. I just want to get them interested enough to watch it, to read the thing. And the biggest pitfall has been, or the thing that I've done wrong, is giving too much work. It just bogs them down and they can't do it. So kind of like Rachel was saying, like, figure out what that core thing is you want them to learn and just really pare it down to that one thing and focus on it, has been really effective.
Well, this is great, Darcy. Thank you. I know you had a very limited window to join us. We really appreciate your contribution today. Take care until we connect again, hopefully sometime in the future.
Thanks for having me.
Take care. Bye. How about you, MAURO? So my original question was, briefly tell us a little bit about how you're doing with the shelter-in-place order, and maybe some preliminary observations about your experience.
Sure. So I teach English at Eureka High. Let me adjust my face so I'm in there. So I want to talk about a couple of things that Rachel was talking about, actually. One, for me, the collaboration, weirdly, not being there in person has meant that we collaborate more. I think for two reasons. One, we have time because our days are, I'm busier now than, I feel busier now than I did before we left physical school, right? My wife, who's also a teacher, and I comment on it all the time. The days are they're just flying, and we feel busy all the time. But a lot of that time is pretty unstructured because we don't have, 6 periods with bells, right? So as teachers, it's easier to find time when we can all meet together. Right? The other thing is we don't have appointments, right? Nobody's going to get their hair cut or whatever. And so when we say, hey, can everybody have a Google Meet on Thursday at 10, before our students are awake, everybody's like, yeah, that'll work. And so there's not a lot of that negotiation that normally takes place. So we have time to meet. And then the other thing, as Rachel said, we're really trying hard to streamline the curriculum. And so we have a need to meet, right? That a pressing need that is maybe not so pressing during the year, because it's really a lot more about what I'm doing in my individual room, right? Whereas I'm a freshman English teacher, and we're working really hard to make sure all the freshmen at Eureka High are having essentially the same experience of Romeo and Juliet right now, which is, well, hard to teach in a classroom. Teaching it online is even more difficult. Another thing that I think Darcy and Rachel both talked about, that connection with kids, I miss that terribly. And these kind of meetings are really hard because it's hard to get kids to turn on their cameras for a variety of reasons. And so you can't see their faces. And I'm used to gauging the room, are they getting it? Do they think what we're talking about is interesting or funny or sad? And if you can't see their faces or hear them, which of course everybody has to be muted, right? Otherwise you get all that background noise of dogs and children and whatever. And so that's really hard. And so I feel weirdly disconnected from my students, but at the same time, because we are calling all of them, I've had so many conversations with kids on phones, via text, or even talking that I wouldn't have had before. That has been, so for some of the students who've been really responsive to reaching out, I feel like this has been even better. And I hope that we can bring some of that back when we do go back to more traditional school. That they're going to take some of the independence back to school with them, and also some of that ability to connect, to realize, hey, no, your teachers are people, you can contact us, because that's not a thing that they feel comfortable doing. And that's one of the things that's been a real learning process for us and them, is how do we make that connection? Because they're not used to having to do that. A lot of them don't know how to write an email at all. Right. And so now, even though we teach them, it's like the first unit of the year, now all of a sudden they actually have to write those emails for real. And you know, so that's been a change. And then the other thing neither of my colleagues talked about so far is what it's like being at home and trying to teach. You know, I have a daughter who's in high school, and so she has Google Meets and Zooms. My kindergartner also has twice a week Zoom meetings, and he's learned all these. He's so funny. He's like, do you have a meeting? I have a meeting too. And he'll come and he'll stand behind me, you know, and make faces. So my students have gotten to know him. You know, and then my wife and I are both teachers, so we're both doing this thing all day. So there'll be times when every single person in the family is sitting in front of a screen. And we're lucky enough to have access to that many screens, one. But it's a challenge. And trying to be a kindergarten teacher on top of trying to be a high school teacher for other people's children, that's been a serious challenge. And man, I respected his kindergarten teacher a lot before, but whoa, more now.
So this was great. There's a bunch of elements to what you said, a couple of things I'm hoping to follow up with you on, and then sort of ask Rachel for her feedback on this. But just sort of structurally, logistically, I guess I hadn't really realized what's happening is for, you know, these are Zoom meetings basically, or Google Hangout meetings with the entirety of the class who shows up, but not everybody can be forced to turn on their camera. So in some cases, there's just people out there and who you can't see, you can't get feedback. But so it's almost like a tale of two cities, where there are some students who are heavily engaged and others who are distant. I guess that's that way in the normal classroom too. But you mentioned that there's also the case that you have multiple people in your house working on screens at the same time sometimes. So that's, I would imagine other students are, you know, there are students who sort of have that same dynamic. Are you aware, so my question to you is, are you aware of that, like, are some people like falling through the cracks where they're not engaged, or they're facing technology barriers? Because we talked about the things that are working, like you know, there is a resource, there is engagement, there is collaboration, some things are working really well. But are you aware of some of those roadblocks that might be, you know, like I said, some kids are kind of missing out on the opportunity, whether they're just choosing it or whether it's technology a gap?
So, I mean, obviously, you know, the technology gap is a huge issue, and Eureka High has been, and the district period, we've actually, I think they've given out almost all the Chromebooks that we have, including the Chromebooks that were in the carts that teachers could check out, right? So they've checked those out to students, one by one, and I think every student who's requested one has gotten one. We also have, they've been distributing internet hotspots for students who don't have internet access, which has been a challenge for those students, right? And that's another reason why we've seen a lot of students who have slowly sort of joined us online, right? Because they were working out their individual issues. And then the other thing we're doing is that, so Darcy was talking about, we're reaching out every week to our students. You know, there are kids I haven't gotten hold of yet. And so we actually have a call log that's not publicly accessible, but accessible to all the teachers. And so we can see, oh, nobody's gotten a hold of this student yet, or so-and-so's gotten a hold of them, and then we can contact them and say, well, how did you manage to contact this student? And so we're working through that. We've got most student cell phones now. Our office worked really hard to get most student cell phone numbers into the computer so we can get them, because it's way easier to get a hold of them through their cell phones than through their parents or guardians. And then our counselors and and the administrative staff is doing a fantastic job of tracking down kids who aren't online as well. We haven't, of course, found every kid and gotten every kid back engaged, but we're working at it. I mean, we're working really hard. I'm sure Rachel has some things to add too.
Thanks, MAURO. Yeah, what about you, Rachel? I mean, so any feedback on what he informed us about these gaps or possibly students kind of slipping through the cracks or just technology gaps in general?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing that I'll say is that I was super impressed with our district when this was first announced. I feel like within the course of a week, we had computers in kids' hands. We had packets for kids who did not have that technology. And meanwhile, I feel very lucky. I have a teaching community that's spread out throughout California and Oregon, and lots of friends who are teachers all over. So we're always kind of comparing notes. And, I was talking to friends in big major cities, and they were like, we just didn't do anything this week because we just don't know what to do, right? And so Eureka was so on top of it. And I was like, well, we're getting Chromebooks to our kids. We have buses going around and delivering packets. We have food service starting. So it was really incredible to see. I think it's easy to be like, well, this one kid didn't get a computer yet. And there are, of course, kids falling through the cracks here and there. But like MAURO mentioned, like our counselors are calling. We have shared spreadsheets. We're figuring things out. And this is new for everyone. And I've just been I was really impressed. I was bragging to a lot of people how well our district handled it. But on the flip side to kids falling through the cracks too, though, is that there have been some kids who don't usually participate very much in a traditional classroom setting who have really excelled online. I was putting in grades this morning and I started looking at kids different third quarter grade, which was before online learning, versus fourth quarter grade. And all of a sudden I'm seeing these kids and I was like, whoa, this kid didn't turn anything in when we were in the classroom. And now, whether it's because they're home and their parents are over their shoulder all the time, or they just do better, in this format, I would say that for every kid who's falling through the cracks, I'm seeing a kid who's maybe doing a little better in this format. And, they can call me, they can text me. I know not every teacher's comfortable giving their personal phone number, but I haven't had any issues with it. And I think some of those kids needed that kind of one-on-one connection ability, and it's easier for them over technology. And maybe that's generational, maybe that's who they are, but it almost feels in some ways we're meeting some of these kids more where they're at than we were able to before. So
MAURO, I saw you shaking your head when Rachel mentioned that some students are somewhat surprising and that they're really thriving under the adverse conditions. Do you have any experiences that you want to share on that at all?
Well, I think just what Rachel was saying, I have students that are kind of blowing my mind, that are doing better. And I don't really know why at this point. I could speculate, that we were talking about the camera thing before, how I can't make students turn on the camera, and I encourage them to, and some of them can't. They don't have the internet bandwidth. They don't have a computer that has a camera. They're logistical issues. But a lot of them feel a lot of social pressure, in a classroom where you've got 32 other human beings in there, and when you open your mouth, everybody looks at you. So for some of the kids, I think online learning is liberating. Even if they speak in a virtual class with 30 other people in it, if they have their camera off, nobody sees them. They don't have to think about, how does my hair look today? What is my makeup on point? All that. And I think that's liberating for some of them. And I think some of them find being in a room with 34 other people super distracting. And so they can actually get work done in their room by themselves. Of course, the flip side of that is we have students who are doing their dutifully coming to their Google Meets and whatever, and they've got mom cooking in the background and their little sister running around, and you can hear the TV and whatever, because they don't have a private space in their house where, or the computer's not in a private space, or they only have one computer, or so there is really you can see this divide. But I think Rachel's right that for every kid who is really, really struggling, we have a kid who is finding their stride, maybe for the first time in school. So
That's great. That's really great to hear. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Rachel.
Oh, I was just going to add to that too, that I think, you know, you kind of mentioned briefly with Darcy, this idea that like, we don't know what the fall is going to look like. And I'm not saying that I do or have any idea. Like, I don't want to put out there that we've heard anything or we know, but it makes me think about, you know, coming back in the fall, if we were to. It's like, I think, you know, there's a good case to be made that some kids may stay online and some kids may come back to school, and having a hybrid model. You know, I think there's so many things in society that we're like, we're going to come out of this, you know, experience different. And in terms of education, you know, I think that's something that we might see change, right? More people online, or more kids choosing that path. And I hope that's not to the detriment of school districts. But you know, we're, again, meeting kids where they're at and figuring out what works best for them.
So on that line of thinking, so what is working for students? I kind of want to tap into a little bit your impression, Rachel, of student well-being. So you mentioned that the buses were circulating and providing like handout packets and food. So there is a connection still. The school district still has a connection with the household. But do you have any feedback, or do you get a sense at all of, you know, are the students thriving? And I know you said it's a mixed story, but are you also, do you think there's maybe some risks that or threats that we're being made aware of the new remote learning?
I mean, I think I only know so much as what my students tell me and what, you know, I hear. And so it's very much one-on-one, and talking to some kids who are sad and they miss their friends and they miss their connections and they miss their teachers. I think talking to some seniors who are really disappointed at what their graduation and their prom or lack thereof is going to look like. And I think, you know, as teachers, we're just really trying to be empathetic to that and understand. And, you know, I think it's easy as adults to sometimes say to them, like, but you're going to have this whole different story that nobody, you know, like, it's going to be such, and it's hard in the moment to feel that way, I'm sure. I mean, I don't know how I would feel if I was 18 right now. So, you know, I think there's a lot of kids missing that social connection. It really emphasizes how much more than just learning school is. I mean, I think we all knew that as teachers. We miss our students. We miss those relationships. We miss, you know, like, you know, I'm the president of, I'm not the president of anything. I'm the advisor for the Black Student Union. And like, those kids had so many things planned for the end of the year that we were going to do. And it's just over for them, they feel. So I think, you know, we're trying to keep connections alive and keep kids engaged in the stuff other than just the learning part. But it's hard to convince a teenager sometimes that it's going to be a good story, you know? So
yeah. Well, thank you. So what about you, MAURO? Besides student, you know, observations about student well-being, maybe we could add, you know, bring into this fold about parents, about what it's like to have to now engage with parents remotely like this. Maybe if it's whether it's curriculum related, whether it's well-being related. Have you noticed the changes to how you are connecting with family, with parents? And also, are you finding parents to be responsive in some cases or non-responsive in others? Some observations about the two-way communication with parents.
So I think it's actually super interesting that I think I'm communicating maybe less with parents, because we've gone to this model of essentially trying to communicate directly with students. And so what that means is that while I'm spending more time on the phone or in Google Meets or whatever, talking with my students one-on-one than I ever did before, I'm not spending a lot of time talking to parents on the phone or guardians. A lot of times mom will be in the background, you know, and I'll hear, she'll say, ask him about, you know, or I've had a couple where I've have had a call mom or dad or whomever, and I've been put on speakerphone, and you know, the student is standing right there, and we have this kind of interesting three-way conversation about their progress and whatever. And so far, nearly every family member I've talked to has been very supportive. And they understand that what we're doing is difficult. A lot of them, I think, are also struggling. I think we mentioned maybe before we were formally recording, but you know, we have parents who are still working, and they leave the house every day, and they leave their kids home, and they need them to work while they're gone. And so while we have some kids whose parents are standing there, or their guardians are standing there right behind them saying work, 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 we have some kids who are at home all day by themselves because their parents are at work. We have some of our students whose parents work in the medical field, whose parents are nurses or doctors or whatever. So it's not only that they go to work, but they're going to work I know our cases are way down now, but initially when we had 50 or so cases, there was a lot of stress, I think, in those households, and probably still is. So we had students like that. And then, you know, of course, you were talking about just what our students' home lives are like. I think, you know, that hasn't changed. It's the same as it was before, except, as I think we're starting to see nationally too, that a lot of the issues are exacerbated because we can't leave the house. That kid who felt safe at school can't go to school, and so they're stuck at home, and maybe that's not the safest place for them, or they don't feel safe there. And so you know, and then Rachel was talking about the Black Student Union, and I'm the advisor for the YA Club, which is our Gay Straight Alliance. And so many of those students are missing that outlet too that they had to be with not just their friends, but their community, maybe a community they don't really have access to at home. And then, you know, our seniors, I'm also a senior class advisor, and we had so many things planned for the end of the year: the senior picnic, the prom, safe and sober graduation, the graduation ceremony itself, powder puff, all of these huge milestone moments that are so important to the seniors and that they look forward to for years, and they're just all done. You know, and that's really sad for me. I worked with that group of kids, or have worked with that group of kids, for 4 years, and we didn't get an ending, right? Hopefully we're going to have a graduation in July, you know, and we're all going to get to be there together and celebrate. But, you know, at this point, it's going to end in June, and we're going to feel like we missed something, and so that's difficult for the students. It's difficult for us, and I know Rachel's absolutely right. I have my daughter and I have talked about how I don't remember anything from my senior year, really. I got like 2 stories from the last couple of weeks of my senior year. Like, I won a Paula Abdul CD at Safe and Sober graduation, I think, you know, whatever. Their stories are going to be, I mean, they're going to be the generation that did this. Hopefully they're going to be the only generation that did this, right? So their stories are going to be amazing, but that's a hard thing to say right now. It doesn't ease the pain of the moment, I don't think.
Right. So kind of looking, you know, you mentioned school year ending in June, which is in about a month from now, and also the potential for July possibly being graduation. Of course, there's no way to really know how this ebb and flow of closing and opening, possibly closing again, is going to play out. And I'm quite sure that, you know, the decisions about the fall are yet to be made. We'll probably know more in July or whenever maybe August, when they sort that out. But you guys both mentioned that the administration, particularly you, Rachel, it has been surprisingly supportive and on point, so much so that you can share sort of best practices and share that, you know, like, for example, you said, like, they are, you know, tracking and ways to communicate with people, students that we sort of all as teachers, your organization, your peers need to follow up with more, providing the resources. Like, it seems like they are checking the boxes. have you heard at all? I guess I'll ask you, Rachel, first. Have you heard at all about developing more robust plans for potentially in the fall, or sort of best practices for remote learning that may be shared with other teachers who, you guys are all learning on the fly now, but that maybe there's some sense of regrouping and checking in and figuring out what works best. Have you guys seen any of those conversations happen yet, or get planned for the future?
So just to kind of start, there hasn't been anything official from our administration, and I don't want to put anything out there that like we haven't, I don't want to put any words out there that haven't come down. So I don't know. I'm actually, unfortunately, very sad to say that I'm not actually returning to Eureka High School in the fall. My family and I are moving out of the area. But that being said, I think there are conversations going on between us as teachers about what we can take from this, what we can learn from this. If we had to do more remote teaching in the future, I think what that would look like. So there's been informal things, nothing official. I know that I'm seeing the value in, my classes had been using Google Classroom all year, and so they were very comfortable logging into that. But I'm also seeing how many parts of Google Classroom I wasn't using that I'm now being forced to, and just having them navigate that. And I've been—
Do you mind giving an example?
Yeah, I mean, just for example, separated. Google Classroom has features like where you can put things into different categories of classwork, and I'm using that heavily now. And so being able to kind of have them go in and navigate, like, where is your work due? Where's your calendar in Google Classroom? Where are the things that you haven't turned in? Whereas before it was just kind of a, just look at the top of Google Classroom and it will be there. Now it's kind of, they have to be able to dig deeper and go to a Google Meet through Google Classroom and things like that we just didn't need in the same way when we were in the classroom. And I'm seeing now, I think my in-person classroom could have benefited from using some features, some organization and such in Google Classroom a little bit deeper, and just making sure that, I think MAURO mentioned, like, we teach a unit at the beginning of freshman year about how to write an email. And I'm seeing from juniors, some of their emails that they send me are a little lackluster. So, maybe going back and reteaching that and re-emphasizing it every year, because, this isn't going away. This online, my husband's sitting right over there and he's working from home right now. And I think even when, quote unquote, they can go back to the office, like, it'll save him a commute every day if he doesn't go back to the office. Like, I don't know if he's going to be going to the office every single day going forward. And I think these kids going forward into the job market and going into life, like, they're going to be expected to log on online and go to a Zoom meeting and take care of things this way, So I don't know if there's necessarily like any plans specifically for the fall, but I'm seeing as a teacher, ways that I can improve my teaching and integrate more technology to make them more to make them more literate, not just in Google, but in technology in general, right? Like, they need to be able to log on to Google Meets and Zoom and figure both of those out, right? So that's kind of something I see going forward that teachers and we'll all be collaborating and working on for the good of our students.
Awesome. How about you, MAURO? Do you have any feedback at all on that question about sort of what the outlook might be for remote teaching, and maybe specifically observations about, conversations because Rachel's leaving, but you'll be here. But if not specific to necessarily your district's plans, but about, more generically about teaching as a practice.
Well, I think going forward, I think all the districts, all of our local districts and education generally is faced with that same question right now, right? And I know that that our district is thinking about it. As Rachel said, we're still in the very preliminary stages of that. I mean, I think a lot of the early parts of this were reactions. What do we do? How do we solve this immediate problem? Our students don't have technology access. We have to get them technology access. Okay, now they have computers, but they don't have Wi-Fi. We have to get them Wi-Fi, right? What are we going to do about the third quarter? Okay, we solved that problem. Okay, so what are we going to do about semester 1 or semester 2 grades? So it's been, you know, and now we're starting to think about, we're starting to hear them talk about, the administration talk about, what are our plans for graduation? What are our options, right? Because as you say, we don't know. There are too many things that we don't know. So I think, and I know that our principal has started thinking about what's going to happen at the beginning of next year, but we don't know, right? We know that this isn't going to be gone. We know that things are going to be different. And so we have to prepare for that. But I think it's kind of a moving target. And I think we're all having to be really open-minded about where we might go. I did want to talk a little bit about what Rachel was saying about technology in the classroom. I've been trying for years to integrate technology into my classroom, and a lot of times we use PowerSchool, and it can be complicated, right? And we think of our students, we like to talk about them being digital natives. They're not really. I mean, they're digitally native in the sense that they can pick up a phone and they can figure out how to use Snapchat or whatever, but that doesn't mean that they know how to word process or send an email or troubleshoot an application that's new to them. That's not a phone application. You know, phone applications are meant to be really intuitive, and you know, a lot of these online apps like Zoom or Canvas or some of the other learning management systems that schools use they're complex and they're not easy to use, and the kids struggle when they use them. And I've been for years saying, you know, when you go to college, you're going to have to use this. All the colleges now, they use this, whatever. This, all of a sudden now it's going to be, remember what happened last year? We need to know how to use these tools, and you do too, because this is the way things are now, right? And it'll be interesting to see if there are long-term changes like Rachel's talking about, where more people are working from home. You know, my wife used to be in banking, and they were really reluctant to let her work from home, even though she totally could have, right? Her job didn't require her to be in the building most of the time, but you know, there was a lot of that old way of thinking. And I think what's being demonstrated right now is a lot of the work that we do can be done from home. And maybe we don't have to meet in person as often. Maybe that doesn't apply. You know, I miss my kids. I want to be back in the classroom with my students, but maybe fewer of them at once, you know, or something like that. And maybe we do use online tools more. So, you know, it's a big unknown going forward, but I think this may have a lot of positive outcomes too, ultimately.
Which is great. Because, you know, I remember hearing in the past, I have an uncle who was an education reform specialist, and his job, he was a PhD candidate. I think he was an all but dissertation. Ultimately, he didn't get a PhD, but he would present to school administrators that all these cutting edge developments in, you know, pedagogy research, the science of teaching. How about people need to work on projects in groups and collaborate, develop communication skills, technology skills, and sort of like witness from the business community or the tech community ways that teaching and learning evolves. But he, you know, hopefully his colleagues and collaborators don't see this and think I'm spilling the beans, but he said basically administrators are like, look, I'm managing, you know, a hornet's nest or like some ridiculously complex system that doesn't allow me to think outside the box and bring new approaches and new technologies on board. So there was this general tendency of resistance, but it sounds like the reality of our current situation has informed you both that the school is resilient, the children are resilient, and there's benefits over the horizon that could be had for people picking up and developing these new skills and approaches. In our final minutes here together, I'd ask, I guess I'll start with you, Rachel, if you'd want. Any last thoughts about, any of the stuff we covered today, or your, outlook and optimism for the future of remote learning?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, I think that there's a lot of benefits. I think we've seen a lot of good come out of this. I'm really hopeful that kind of education in general takes what positives we can from this, helping those students who learn better this way, having maybe fewer kids in the classroom so that we can focus our energies as teachers, and, I'm really hopeful that we go that way coming out of this, as opposed to, maybe having, seeing the benefits of having all of this technology in our kids' hands. Like, I would love to see having more devices for more kids, and making sure that we're making it equitable and making a fair learning environment for all of them. And so, I don't know, I think I'm really impressed with, like I said, Eureka's city schools, and I'm really impressed with my coworkers at the high school and seeing all of the hard work that people have been putting in. There's not a single person that I can say I would say is being lazy or not putting their heart into this. And it's been a big change for all of us. So to see people step up is really heartening and really exciting. So.
That's awesome. Thank you. How about you, MAURO? Any last thoughts about any of the subjects or topics we covered today, and maybe some outlook for the future?
Sure. I think that, well, one thing I wanted to mention was kind of piggybacking off of something that you were talking about. Education, it's a big ship, and it's hard to turn. And there are a lot of things that get in our way, regulatory things, and people don't like change, and especially in an institution like their local school. But I think one thing that has really been heartening for me is to see not just Eureka City schools, but schools all over, my son's school as well, how agile these huge systems have managed to be when given the space and the necessity to make those changes, right? I mean, we often are very slow to adopt new tools because we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing and whatever. And I think those intentions are laudable. But this has made us really make some changes very rapidly, and some of them are going to end up not being very good, almost certainly. But I think some of them are going to change the way we do things long term. So I think that part has been fantastic. I too am looking forward to getting back into a more normal classroom. I miss my students. I miss going to work every day. It's hard to work from home, but I'm hopeful, right? I mean, I think ultimately this won't last forever. This isn't the new normal. Some of the things that we're doing now, I think, are going to be the new normal, but I don't think all of them are. And I'm hopeful for myself and for my students and my colleagues. And I think it's going to be better eventually. I think this fall is going to be different. But beyond that, I hope it's going to look a lot more like it used to, but not completely like it used to.
So there's a silver lining in the challenge that we will rise to evolve the process and the techniques to make it more, compatible and more supportive of people thriving, students thriving. That's what it sounds like from both you guys. So this is really great. I want to thank you both. You guys have been listening to the Eureka High School teachers speak out about the COVID-19 pandemic. I was joined by both MAURO and Rachel from the English department, and earlier DARCY, who is an art teacher at the high school and middle school in Eureka. You guys, this was really great. I really appreciate it. And hopefully your experience continues to be as positive as it sounds like it was. And I wish you guys both the best of luck going forward. Hopefully we can connect again soon.